Hi everyone, I'm Srishti and I've made this video to explain a concept of globals and variables. It seems like a very confusing concept and therefore I've used a lot of examples in order to explain this concept. But before we come to the examples, we'll do a formal definition of these concepts. The first is the definition of global variables. So global variable is a variable that is defined outside the function. So you have certain functions in Python. If the variable is defined outside those functions, then that variable is implicitly global. A local variable, on the other hand, is a variable which is assigned a new value inside the function. So that means it will become a local variable if you're assigning a new value or you're creating or defining that variable inside the function. So after the definitions, the next thing is the scope. Now what is the scope of these variables and what actually scope itself is? So scope is the portion of the program where the value of the variable can be accessed. In case of global variables, it is the entire program, that is the value of that global variable can be accessed anywhere inside that program. And in case of a local variable, the scope is the function in which they are defined. So if you want to access that variable, it will only be accessible inside the function it was defined and nowhere else. Now we are going to start with the examples that I have created. This example is going to illustrate the difference between global and local variables, and it's going to clarify the basic concept of global and local variables. So what I've done in this program, it's a very simple program, and the first thing that I've done is I've declared a global variable here, foo, and this is a global variable because it has been declared outside any function. So that is pretty simple. After that, I have declared a function here. I have defined a function, and inside this function I have declared another variable, and that is local underscore var, and I have made it equal to a string bar. Now why do we call this as a local variable? We call this as a local variable because this variable has been defined inside a function. So this becomes a local variable. Now we are clear about why global var is a global variable and local var is a local variable. The next thing that I do is I print the values of these variables inside the function and outside the function. So inside the function I have these two statements which are going to print the values, and outside the function I have these two statements, these two print statements which are going to print the values. Now before we run this program and see what the output is, we are just going to try and predict the output based on the information that we had gathered in the slide on the definition of global and local variable and their scopes. So the first thing is the global variable. Inside this statement, when we are going to call this function, this will be printed properly because the global variable it has a scope of the entire program. So it is going to be accessible over the entire program. We can print it at any point of time. And similarly, for the same reasons, even this statement is going to go without any problem. The next thing is the local variable. Now when we are going to access local variable inside the function, it is going to create no problem because its scope is there inside that function. It is accessible inside that function. But what is going to create a problem, which I have written in the statement here, is that the local variable, when we are going to try and access it outside the function inside which it was declared, it is going to create an error because it is not accessible there. The scope of the local variable is only the function inside which it is declared. So once I run this program, I get this error, name error, which shows that the Python does not know that what this variable is because it is not accessible at this point of time. It is accessible only inside the function where it was declared. So using this example, we are clear about the scope and what actually global and local variables are. Now this is another example where I have shown you that how can we set the value of a global variable. Now this example is not going to work, but I have still included it in my video so as to tell you that what mistakes we generally can make when we are doing this work. So what I have done is that I have declared a variable outside the definition, so it's a global variable. I've made it out. Now what I'm trying to do is that I've made a function ex2 over here, and inside that function I want to change the value of this global variable, and therefore I say that var is equal to in, and I just print the value inside that function and outside the function, just like we did in the previous example, to see that everything is going fine or not. So this example is not going to work, and I'm just going to run this thing and see what the output is in order to understand what is happening. Alright, so what happens is that once I call this function ex2, the value that gets printed is in, which shows that variable's value in, and this is what is being printed. But when I call this outside print statement, the value that gets printed out is out, which I was not expecting because I had changed the value of var as in. So why did this out get printed? Now the reason is that global variables are accessible anywhere inside the program, but they cannot be changed anywhere inside the program. So if you have a variable global with global variable out over here, and I am trying to change it inside, it is not actually changing over here, but instead Python is creating a new local variable with the name var, and it is storing the value of in inside it, and that is what actually is happening. So when you say that print outside the function var is var, this variable which is getting printed is not that global variable, is not that local variable which had been described inside this function. It is this global variable that I had declared outside. So now what do we do in order to actually change the value? This is the correct method to change the value. I have made a new program here because I need to illustrate another concept through this. I have made a global variable globvar, globvar, and I have made it equal to 0, and here I have written two functions. The first one is set global var to 1. That means I need to change or modify the global copy of that globvar, and here I have printed the value of globvar, and I've called these functions one by one. So what does this function do? What is the difference that we observe here as compared to the incorrect method that we did in the previous example is that over here we have used this keyword global, and then we have changed the value of this global variable. This keyword global has been provided by Python so that you know that you are trying to change the value of this global variable. It is going to ensure that by mistake you do not change the value of a global variable. Since global variables have an accessibility over the entire program, and if you are able to change them anywhere in the program, it might lead to errors. So you need to write this keyword specifically when you're changing the value inside a function, so that you don't make an error and you know that you want to change that value, and it is only then that you will be able to modify this value. This happens when you're trying to modify the global copy. But if you want to access the global copy, or you want to just read it, in that case you don't need to use that keyword global again. Alright, so you're just going to write print globvar and it is going to work, and here we have. So initially we had 0 as a value, but we are able to successfully change its value to 1 using this keyword global, and once we call these functions and we actually print, we see that we have 1 printed, exactly how we wanted it to be. So you must remember the keyword global. Now I have another example over here, and this example is basically going to illustrate that what happens to variables, that is the global and the local variables, when you're talking about 2 or 3 functions wherein one function is nested inside a function. So before I start with what actually happens is, I need to tell you what nested functions are for those who might not know it. If I have a function that I've defined, say ex3 over here, and I have another function which I define inside this big function, then we have a nested function here. So inner function is being nested inside the ex3 function. So this is what nested functions are. Now I have created a variable outer, and I have made its value equal to out. Now it must be we must remember that this is actually a global variable to that inner function. So now I have this var inner, and I have made its value inner, and now I'm going to print these values inside this function, that is by calling inner, and outside the function by calling these two statements. And again, this is, I'm expecting, will give me an error somewhere. Alright. So now let me see that what is happening. Now when I call this function inner and I say print var outer, it is going to print the global value, this var outer value, which is there outside the function inner. So the scope of this var outer is this function, and over the entire function it is going to be accessible. Since this function is inside the bigger function, var outer is going to be accessible, and it is going to print the value outer as expected. And when I try to print the var inner value, again it will be printed because the scope of this var inner is the function inner, and even that is printed. Now what happens is that I've come out of this function inner. Now what I do is that I print the outer variable. It is printed because the scope of the var outer variable is the function ex3. So even that is printed. Now what gives me an error is this statement. Now let us see why does that give me an error. When a function is defined, when a local variable is defined inside the function, then its scope is only that function inside which it was defined. Now this where inner variable was defined inside the function inner, so it cannot be accessed outside that function, and this is exactly what I'm trying to do in this statement. So Python does not know that what where inner is at this point of time, and therefore it is going to give me a name error, this, and that is the way that we come to know that the scope of var inner is only the inside the function inner, that is this function. Alright, so that's all I have for the time being. I hope you were able to understand whatever I told and you enjoyed yourself. Thank you so much for watching this video.